What happens when one of Hollywood's most intense, fiercely private stars suddenly decides he's had enough and pushes back, live, against one of television's most fearless voices? The lights inside the studio of The View blaze brighter than usual that morning. The audience buzzes with anticipation, whispers spreading through the rows like a current of electricity. It's supposed to be just another celebrity appearance, another polite conversation, another promotional stop. But no one in that room knows that in the next few minutes, the calm daytime talk show atmosphere is about to transform into something far more explosive. Because seated backstage, adjusting the cuff of his jacket and staring at the floor in silence, is none other than Tom Cruise. And at the round table waiting for him is Whoopi Goldberg. Two personalities, two very different energies, one moment that nobody saw coming. Before we dive into what happened next, make sure you subscribe to Stage View, like the video, and drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. Because moments like this, they don't happen often. And when they do, everyone talks about them. The producers had been excited all week. Tom Cruise was coming in to promote his newest blockbuster. The marketing team had scheduled interviews across the country, but this one was supposed to feel lighter, more conversational. Daytime television. Smiles, laughter, maybe a few behind-the-scenes stories from film sets. Nothing controversial. At least, that was the plan. Backstage, a producer leans toward Cruise. 5 minutes, Tom. Cruise nods politely, but his expression is unreadable. Anyone who knows his career knows the intensity he brings into every room he walks into. A kind of laser focus. The same focus that turned him into one of the most recognizable actors in the world. From Top Gun to Mission Impossible, he built a career on control, precision, and relentless drive. But live television? That's chaos. Across the studio, the hosts of The View are settling into their seats. Whoopi Goldberg adjusts her glasses and glances at her notes. Around her, the other panelists chat casually, flipping through cue cards and sipping coffee. The audience applauds as the theme music begins. Cameras glide into position. The red lights blink on. And we're back, Whoopi says with her familiar calm authority. The crowd cheers. Today we've got a guest who really doesn't need much introduction, she continues. Actor, producer. The man who insists on doing his own stunts, sometimes to the terror of every insurance company in Hollywood. Laughter ripples through the studio. Please welcome Tom Cruise. The applause becomes thunder. Cruise walks out with that unmistakable smile, shaking hands, waving to the audience, greeting the hosts one by one. Tom, good to see you, Whoopi says warmly. Always great to be here, Cruise replies. They sit. For a moment, everything feels exactly as expected. Whoopi begins with easy questions. So you're back at it again with the crazy stunts. Cruise laughs. I guess I never really stopped. You hang off planes, jump off cliffs. I'm just curious. When do you finally say, you know what, maybe today I'll let a stunt double handle this? The audience chuckles. Cruise leans forward slightly. Well, honestly, never. More laughter. The conversation flows easily. Stories from the set. Training for dangerous scenes. Moments where everything almost went wrong. Cruise is charming, focused, charismatic. But then the tone shifts. Subtly at first. Whoopi glances at her notes again. You've had an incredible career, she says. But you've also had, let's call them, very public moments. Interviews that people still talk about years later. Cruise nods politely. Sure. You're a very passionate guy, Whoopi continues. The studio grows slightly quieter. And sometimes that passion surprises people. Cruise smiles, but his eyes sharpen. I suppose that's fair. The other hosts lean forward, sensing a change in the atmosphere. Whoopi tilts her head. You know, there was that famous moment years ago, jumping on couches, defending personal beliefs. A lot of people wondered whether that was the real Tom Cruise or just a moment. A few audience members murmur softly. Cruise exhales slowly. Well, he says, choosing his words carefully, when people are passionate about something, sometimes it gets amplified. Whoopi nods. But some critics said it crossed a line. There it is. The first real tension. Cruise's smile fades just a fraction. Critics say a lot of things. The audience laughs nervously. Whoopi leans back slightly, studying him. You've been in the spotlight for decades, Tom. So let me ask you something directly. Cruise tilts his head. Sure. Do you ever feel like you've had to control your image too tightly? Like the public only gets the version of you that's been carefully managed? The room goes still. For a split second, Cruise doesn't answer. The cameras zoom in. Whoopi isn't smiling now. She's curious. Direct. Cruz rests his hands on the table. I think everyone manages how they present themselves, he says calmly. But some people say you manage it more than most. The tension grows thicker. The other hosts glance at each other. Whoopi continues. You've built an empire, Tom. Massive movies. Global fame. But there's always been this sense that interviews with you are very controlled. Cruz raises an eyebrow. Controlled. Safe, Whoopi clarifies. Polished. Almost like we're talking to the brand of Tom Cruise instead of the person. The audience reacts with a mix of gasps and murmurs. Now the atmosphere has shifted completely. Cruz's posture straightens. For a moment, he simply looks at Whoopi. And then something changes. Instead of deflecting the question, instead of smiling and moving on, he pushes back. You know what's interesting about that? Cruz says. Whoopi leans forward. What? Cruz gestures lightly toward the table. People say they want authenticity, but the moment someone is truly themselves, they get criticized for it. The audience quiets. Whoopi raises an eyebrow. That sounds like a dodge. Cruz chuckles softly. No, it's reality. Now the studio is fully silent. Cruz continues. When I speak honestly about things I believe in, people say I'm intense. When I focus on my work, people say I'm controlling my image. He shrugs slightly. So which one do people actually want? A murmur of agreement comes from somewhere in the crowd. Whoopi taps her pen against the table. Well, maybe people just want the truth. Cruz nods slowly. Then maybe they should be ready to hear it. The room freezes. Because suddenly, this isn't a casual interview anymore. This is a confrontation. Whoopi studies him carefully. Are you saying people haven't been ready for the truth from you? Cruz meets her gaze directly. I'm saying that sometimes the narrative around a person becomes more important than the person themselves. The audience reacts again, some applause, some uneasy laughter. Whoopi tilts her head. So the narrative about Tom Cruise is wrong? Cruz pauses. Then he says something no one in the studio expected. Parts of it are. A ripple of tension sweeps across the room. Whoopi's expression changes. Then let's talk about that. Cruz nods once. Let's. And suddenly, the producers in the control room realize something. This interview is no longer following the script. The conversation is about to go somewhere unpredictable. And what happens next will leave the entire studio stunned. The studio lights suddenly feel hotter. Not physically, but emotionally. Because everyone in that room can feel it now. Something has shifted. The easy rhythm of a daytime talk show has been replaced with a slow-burning tension that crawls through the studio like a storm building behind clear skies. At the table of the View, the hosts exchange subtle glances. This wasn't in the pre-interview briefing. Not even close. And yet, sitting calmly in his chair, hands folded loosely on the table, Tom Cruise looks completely comfortable. Across from him, Whoopi Goldberg leans back slightly, studying him with the careful curiosity of someone who has spent decades interviewing the most powerful and unpredictable people in entertainment. She knows tension when she sees it. And she also knows when a guest decides they're not going to play along with the usual talk show choreography. The audience sits in absolute silence. Whoopi taps her pen once against her cue card. You said parts of the narrative about you are wrong, she says calmly. Cruz nods. Yes. So let's talk about that. A faint murmur moves through the crowd. Cruz shifts slightly in his seat, crossing one leg over the other. He begins. When you've been in this industry as long as I have, people start telling your story for you. Whoopi tilts her head. That comes with fame. Sure, Cruz says. But eventually the story becomes louder than the truth. One of the other hosts leans forward. So what part of the story is wrong? Cruz looks at her briefly, then back to Whoopi. For years people have said I'm controlling, mysterious, calculated, that everything about me is managed. He gestures slightly toward the cameras. But what people don't see is the work, the commitment, the risk. Someone in the audience claps quietly before stopping themselves. Cruz continues. I've spent decades pushing myself physically, mentally, creatively. Hanging off airplanes, jumping out of helicopters, doing things most actors wouldn't even consider. He's clearly referring to the jaw-dropping stunts in the Mission Impossible series. The crowd murmurs in recognition. Whoopi nods slowly. No one questions your work ethic. But they question everything else, Cruz replies. His voice is calm, but the intensity behind it is unmistakable. Whoopi leans forward again. Tom, let's be honest, she says. You've had moments where people felt uncomfortable. The room tightens again. Cruz's eyes narrow slightly. You mean when I spoke passionately about things? I mean when people felt like they were seeing something unexpected. Cruz smiles faintly. You're talking about the couch moment. A ripple of laughter moves through the audience. Everyone knows exactly what he's referring to, the infamous appearance on the Oprah Winfrey Show years ago. Whoopi shrugs lightly. That's one example. Cruz exhales. You know what's funny about that moment? What? It was real. He spreads his hands slightly. I was in love. I was excited. I was happy. The audience listens closely. And somehow, Cruz continues, that became evidence that I'd lost my mind. A few people laugh softly. But Whoopi isn't laughing. Tom, she says carefully, you have to admit, jumping on a couch surprised people. Cruz chuckles. Sure. But the reaction surprised me. How? Because people say they want authenticity from celebrities, he says. Then the second they get it, they treat it like a spectacle. The crowd murmurs. Whoopi raises an eyebrow. So you think the public punished you for being genuine? Cruz pauses. Then he says quietly, I think they misunderstood the moment. A hush falls across the studio. The other hosts glance toward the control room cameras. This conversation is drifting further and further from the promotional interview they expected. Whoopi folds her hands. But there's more to the narrative than just one moment. Cruz nods slowly. Yes, you've been very vocal about certain beliefs. Cruz's posture stiffens slightly. The audience shifts in their seats. Whoopi continues. And those beliefs sparked controversy. Now the tension becomes unmistakable. Cruz takes a slow breath. You're talking about my faith. The room becomes completely silent. Whoopi doesn't back away. Yes. For a moment, Cruz simply looks at the table. Then he looks up. You know what I find interesting about that conversation? He says. What? Whoopi asks. That when an athlete talks about their faith, people call it inspiring. The audience listens carefully. When a musician thanks God at an award show, people applaud. He pauses. But when I talk about what I believe, he shrugs. Suddenly it's a problem. A murmur spreads through the crowd. Whoopi taps her pen again. Some people felt like you weren't just talking about your beliefs, she says. They felt like you were attacking others. Cruz's eyes sharpen. Is that what you think? Whoopi doesn't answer immediately. She takes a slow breath. I think people remember interviews where you were very confrontational. Cruz nods once. Yes, especially with journalists. Cruz leans forward now. But here's the part that gets left out. The audience leans in. The questions. Whoopi raises an eyebrow. What about them? Cruz's voice stays calm. Sometimes people ask questions designed to provoke a reaction. The other hosts glance at each other. You think journalists baited you? One of them asks. Cruz smiles slightly. Let's just say not every interview is as friendly as it looks on television. The audience laughs nervously. Whoopi folds her arms. So when things got heated, it wasn't your fault. Cruz shakes his head. I didn't say that. Then what are you saying? Cruz pauses for a long moment. The cameras zoom closer. I'm saying the public rarely sees the full conversation. The tension grows again. Whoopi leans in. But they're seeing one right now. Cruz nods. Yes, they are. A beat passes. Then Whoopi says something that instantly changes the energy in the room. All right, Tom. Let's be real. Cruz looks at her. You're one of the most powerful stars in Hollywood. He nods. You've made billions at the box office. Another nod. You've had an army of publicists shaping your image for decades. The audience reacts softly. Then Whoopi asks the question that hits like a lightning strike. So tell me honestly, when was the last time someone challenged you the way I'm challenging you right now? The room goes dead quiet. Even the studio crew behind the cameras stop moving. Cruz doesn't answer immediately. He stares at Whoopi. Not angrily. Not defensively. Just intensely. Then he leans back in his chair. A small smile appears on his face. And he says something that instantly sends a ripple through the audience. Right now, a few people laugh. But the tension doesn't disappear. Whoopi tilts her head. And how does that feel? Cruz shrugs. Refreshing. Now the audience really reacts. A mix of applause and surprised murmurs fills the room. Whoopi smiles faintly. Refreshing? Yes. He leans forward again. Because most interviews these days aren't conversations. What are they? Promotions. The audience laughs again. Even some of the hosts smile. But Cruz isn't finished. And that's why I said yes to coming here. Whoopi studies him. Because you wanted to be challenged. Cruz nods. Yes. A beat passes. Then Whoopi asks quietly, careful what you wish for. The audience erupts with laughter. Cruz laughs too, but there's still a spark in his eyes. And everyone in that room can feel it. This interview isn't calming down. It's building. Because the next question Whoopi asks is about to push Tom Cruise further than anyone expected. For a moment after the laughter fades, the studio feels suspended in time. The cameras glide silently around the table of the view, capturing every expression, every subtle shift in posture. The producers in the control room sit forward in their chairs, headsets buzzing with quiet, urgent whispers. No one wants to interrupt this moment, because something rare is happening, a real conversation, and maybe something even more dangerous. At the center of it all, Whoopi Goldberg watches her guest carefully. She has interviewed presidents, activists, actors, and legends. She knows when someone is giving polished answers, and she knows when someone is standing their ground. Across from her, Tom Cruise sits with the composed stillness of someone who has spent decades under the microscope. But there's a new energy in the room now, the kind that turns ordinary interviews into unforgettable television. Whoopi rests her hands on the table. You said you wanted to be challenged, she says. Cruise nods once. I did. All right. She glances down at her notes, then closes the card completely. The audience reacts immediately. A few gasps, some excited whispers. Because when Whoopi stops reading notes, it means the conversation just became completely unscripted. She leans forward. Let's talk about power. Cruise tilts his head slightly. Power? You're not just a movie star, Whoopi continues. You're an institution in Hollywood. Cruise smiles faintly. That sounds bigger than I feel. But it's true, she says. You run your own productions. You choose your projects. Studios rearrange their entire schedules around you. The audience murmurs in agreement. People say when Mission Impossible moves its release date, Whoopi adds, the whole industry shifts. Cruise chuckles softly. I don't know if it's quite that dramatic. Oh, it is, one of the other hosts says. Laughter ripples through the room. But Whoopi keeps her focus. And with that kind of power, she says carefully, comes influence. Cruise nods slowly. Yes. And influence, Whoopi continues, means responsibility. A pause hangs in the air. Cruise folds his hands. I agree. Then let me ask you something. He waits. Do you think powerful celebrities sometimes forget how much impact their words have? The audience leans in again. Cruise answers calmly. Some do. Did you? The question lands like a stone dropped into still water. Cruise pauses. Then he says something surprising. Probably. A murmur spreads through the audience. Whoopi raises an eyebrow. That's an honest answer. Cruise shrugs slightly. I've had moments where I spoke very strongly about things I believed in. And people pushed back. Yes. The tension softens slightly, but only for a moment. Because Whoopi isn't finished. But there's another side to that story. Cruise looks at her. What side? The people who felt criticized. Cruise's expression tightens just a little. You mean people who disagreed with me? Yes, Whoopi says. One of the hosts jumps in. Some viewers felt you were dismissing their experiences. The studio becomes quiet again. Cruise exhales slowly. You're talking about interviews from years ago. Yes, Whoopi replies. Cruise nods. I've reflected on those moments. And, she asks. The room waits. Cruise leans forward slightly. And I think people heard what they wanted to hear. A ripple of tension returns. Whoopi tilts her head. That sounds like you're shifting the blame. Cruise shakes his head. No. Then explain. Cruise gestures lightly with one hand. When conversations get reduced to headlines, nuance disappears. The audience murmurs in agreement. You can speak for 30 minutes, Cruise continues. And one sentence becomes the story. Whoopi nods slowly. That's media. It is. But that's also reality, she says. Cruise pauses. Then he says something quietly but firmly. Yes, but it's not always fair. A few people clap. Whoopi smiles slightly. Fairness and media don't always go together. The audience laughs. Cruise smiles too, but his eyes remain intense. Then Whoopi asks the question that changes the energy again. So let me flip this around. Cruise nods. Okay, you've been challenged tonight. Yes. You pushed back. Yes. Some people will love that, Whoopi says. Some people will think you're being defensive. Cruise shrugs. That's their choice. Whoopi leans closer. But here's what I'm curious about. Cruz raises an eyebrow. What's that? Why now? The question hangs in the air like a spark waiting for fuel. Why now? Cruz repeats. Yes. You've done hundreds of interviews in your career, Whoopi says. Many of them very polished. The audience nods along. But tonight, she continues, you're pushing back. Cruz looks around the studio. At the cameras. At the audience. At the hosts. Then he says something that surprises everyone. Because I'm tired. A murmur spreads instantly. Whoopi's eyes widen slightly. Tired. Tired of the same conversations, Cruz clarifies. He gestures toward the room. For 30 years, people have asked the same questions. About your career? Whoopi asks. No. About the controversies. The audience murmurs again. Cruz continues. I understand curiosity. I understand criticism. He pauses. But eventually you realize something. What's that? Whoopi asks quietly. That no matter what you say, some people already decided who you are. The room grows very still. One of the hosts speaks up. So you stop trying to change their minds? Cruz nods slowly. Exactly. Whoopi studies him carefully. But tonight, you're trying again. Cruz smiles faintly. Not exactly. Then what are you doing? Cruz leans back. I'm just being honest. The audience applauds softly. Whoopi taps her pen again. Honesty on live television is a dangerous game. Cruz laughs. I've noticed. Laughter fills the room. But then Whoopi asks one final question. And suddenly the room becomes silent again. Let me ask you something personal. Cruz nods. All right. After everything, the fame, the criticism, the headlines. She pauses. Do you ever wish you had chosen a quieter life? The audience collectively holds its breath. Cruz looks down for a moment. Then back up. His answer comes slowly. No. The tension softens. But I do wish people understood something. What's that? Whoopi asks. Cruz glances around the room again. Behind every headline, there's still a human being. The audience erupts into applause. For a moment, even Whoopi smiles warmly. But just as the atmosphere begins to settle, a producer's voice echoes faintly from somewhere off camera. 30 seconds. The show is about to go to commercial. And yet something tells everyone in that room. The most explosive part of this conversation is still coming. Because when they return from the break, one final exchange will send the studio into complete shock and ignite a media storm that no one at The View could have predicted. The applause fades slowly as the studio lights dim slightly for the commercial break. The cameras on the set of The View power down, but the tension in the room doesn't disappear. In fact, it gets heavier. The audience buzzes with whispers, people leaning toward each other, trying to process what they've just watched unfold. That was intense. Did you see his face when she asked that? I've never seen him talk like that. At the round table, the hosts shift in their chairs. Some sip water. One of them exhales and lets out a quiet laugh of disbelief. Across from them, Tom Cruise sits calmly, hands folded, his expression composed. But even he seems more reflective now. Whoopi Goldberg watches him for a moment, then leans slightly closer. You okay? She asks quietly. Cruise nods with a small smile. I'm good. You sure? Yeah. Whoopi chuckles softly. Well, that got interesting. Cruise laughs too. You said careful what you wish for. Fair enough, she replies. A producer walks onto the stage quickly, whispering something to Whoopi. She nods, glancing briefly toward the control room. Across the studio, monitors replay small clips of the interview for timing cues. Even the crew members are staring at the screens. Because something about this conversation feels different. Raw. Unscripted. Real. 10 seconds, a stage manager calls. Everyone straightens. The audience settles. Lights brighten again. The theme music fades in as the cameras glide smoothly back into position. And just like that, America is back inside the moment. Welcome back, Whoopi says, turning toward the camera. We're here with actor and producer Tom Cruise, and we've been having quite the conversation. The audience laughs and applauds. Cruise nods politely. Before the break, Whoopi continues. Tom said something that caught a lot of attention. She glances at him. You said you're tired of the same conversations. Cruise nods slowly. Yes. So let's do something different. The studio becomes quiet again. Whoopi folds her hands. Let's talk about legacy. Cruise raises an eyebrow slightly. Legacy? Yes, she says. You've been one of the biggest stars in the world for decades. The audience nods. From Top Gun to the entire Mission, Impossible franchise, Your career is part of Hollywood history. Applause rises again. Cruise smiles humbly. But legacies are complicated, Whoopi continues. The applause fades. People don't just remember the movies. Cruise nods. They remember the moments. A beat passes. And tonight, Whoopi says quietly, people are going to remember this moment. The audience shifts in their seats. Cruise tilts his head slightly. Probably. Whoopi studies him carefully. So how do you want people to remember you? The question hangs in the air. Cruise thinks for a moment. Then he answers. As someone who loved what he did. A few people clap softly. Someone who gave everything to the work. More applause. And hopefully, Cruise adds, someone who entertained people. The audience cheers louder now. But Whoopi leans forward again. That's the professional answer. Cruise laughs. Okay, what's the personal one? The room grows quiet again. Cruise pauses. Then he says something surprisingly simple. That I tried. The audience murmurs. Tried to what? Whoopi asks. Tried to grow, he replies. The words land softly but powerfully. For a long time, Cruise continues, people only saw one version of me. He gestures toward the cameras. The headlines. The controversies. The stories. He pauses. But a person isn't frozen in time. The audience listens closely. We evolve. We learn. We change. Whoopi nods slowly. That's true. Cruise looks directly at her. And conversations like this help. For a moment, the tension that filled the studio earlier begins to melt away. The audience applauds again. Even some of the hosts smile warmly. Whoopi leans back. Well, she says with a small grin, you definitely got a conversation. Laughter fills the studio. Cruise chuckles. That's what I was hoping for. One of the other hosts adds, I think the internet is going to explode after this. The audience laughs loudly. And she's probably right. Because already, far beyond the walls of this studio, the conversation has begun. Clips of the interview start spreading across social media. Viewers rewind moments where Cruise pushed back. Others replay Whoopi's sharp questions. On platforms like X, reactions pour in by the thousands. Did Tom Cruise just call out media narratives on live TV? Whoopi didn't back down at all. That was the most real interview I've seen in years. Clips begin trending. Commentators debate every line. Entertainment blogs rush to publish headlines. Tom Cruise pushes back during heated moment on The View. Unexpected tension between Cruise and Goldberg sparks viral debate. Within hours, millions of people have watched the exchange. Back in the studio, though, the moment is winding down. Whoopi turns toward the camera again. Tom, thank you for being here. Thank you for having me. And thank you for being willing to have a real conversation. Cruise nods respectfully. I appreciate that. The audience applauds loudly. But before the show ends, Whoopi adds one last comment. You know, interviews are interesting things. Cruise smiles. How so? Sometimes people come on shows to promote a movie, she says. He nods. And sometimes they remind us they're human. The crowd applauds again, this time louder than before. Cruise gives a small, appreciative nod. Moments later, the closing music begins. The cameras pull back. The hosts wave. The audience stands. And just like that, the interview ends. But the story doesn't. Because long after the lights fade inside the studio of The View, the conversation keeps spreading. Late-night hosts reference the exchange. Entertainment analysts break down the tension frame by frame. Fans argue online about who won the moment. Some say Cruise showed courage. Others say Whoopi asked the questions everyone was thinking. But nearly everyone agrees on one thing. It was unforgettable television. And now we want to hear from you. What did you think about this moment between Tom Cruise and Whoopi Goldberg? Was Tom right to push back? Or did Whoopi ask the tough questions that needed to be asked? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We read every one of them. And if you enjoy dramatic celebrity moments like this, make sure you subscribe to Stage View, like this video, and share it with friends who love behind-the-scenes Hollywood stories. Because on Stage View, the most unforgettable moments are just getting started.